This episode of Tales from Atlantis is brought to you by Atlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromatlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Atlantis. I am your host, Kurly Tlapoyawa, and I'm riding solo tonight. Dr. Ariano Tlacatecat is unable to join us, but I hope he's out there with us in spirit and doing well on this fine evening. I'm joined tonight by a special guest, a good friend of mine, Ruben Ochoa. The book, The Calendar, A Mexican Count of Days, the Mexika calendar for the year 10 Rabbit, 2022 to 2023. So for the upcoming Mexika calendar year, is now available for purchase, and it's a beautiful looking calendar, and Ruben is basically the individual whose research I used while putting this calendar together. So, Ruben, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Pretty good, man. It's been a busy day, but I'm glad we're finally getting around, to being able to record and, talk calendar.
Yeah, for sure. So you drove up from San Diego today. How was the drive?
Oh, man, dude. I don't know what's going on these days, but, there's just always traffic, man. Could be worse, but it is what it is, man. Too many people.
Well, when I was there last, I was there with Magnus and my wife, and we drove up from San Diego to LA, and the traffic wasn't too bad, but I think we came up. It must have been the time of day that worked out well for us because it's LA traffic, but it wasn't too bad.
Mm-hmm. No, most of the traffic is actually down there when you're coming back up. As far as I'm concerned, once I hit LA, it was all good.
Nice. So today we're going to be talking about the calendar system, the Mexika calendar system, and I basically wanted to, if you could, I wanted to ask you, when you're talking to people about the calendar and you're explaining things to them, I don't know if you go into what got you interested in the calendar system, but if you would care to, could you fill us in on that? Like, let us know a little bit about what prompted you to start investigating how the calendar functions.
Oh my, the answer to that is like, where is the beginning of that really, even for me? Because since I was, 10, 11, 12, I all of a sudden became interested in Indigenous history. You start buying all the art books that are available to you, and you get to high school. That's not really the focus of anything, but I'm still doing that. When you read about Indigenous history of Mexico, inevitably, I'm here eating my words, inevitably, you're going to obviously talk about the calendar, and I'm really into math. It's just something I was drawn to, right? So I start looking at the calendar. I come across who knows how many decades ago at this point. Not that I'm ancient, but, time does fly. And, back in the days, one of the first websites that was out there was azteccalendar.com, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, I was probably just shy of 18 when I started doing Danza Azteca. So even more so, right? I was already into the calendar and all that before then. Start looking at that. Start meeting people in Danza. And, the other inevitability is that people want to know what their symbol is. that was the resource we had back in the day, man. AztecCalendar.com. Do not go to it, people. That was the resource. And
I know how many people have gone to that website and used it to find out their tonali and got it tattooed on their bodies, right?
You know, so it's one of those, right? I'm talking about like I'm 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and people are coming to me asking me what their tonali is. That was a resource. And I feel bad, man. There's some kids out there named because I helped them along with referencing AztecCalendar.com, man. And, you know, I don't know, man. I must have been around 22 when I just said, I realized something's off, something's wrong. We don't have enough information to truly know what the answer here is as to the correct correlation, and I just abandoned it. But I mean, again, the start with my interest in the calendar, yeah, it probably does go back. Gosh, I'm getting old. I'm going to age myself and say 30 years ago. So I'm dominating the conversation, but essentially a very, very good friend of mine who I knew when we were both working on our bachelor's degrees at different universities, moved away to work on a graduate degree, comes back into town and is going by a Nahuatl name. So I asked him, hey, you know, what's the deal with that? What's up with that? And at that point in time, he mentioned a certain individual. Shall we name this individual? I don't know.
Probably not.
That proposes a particular correlation. And let's just say I knew the correlation put forth by Alfonso Caso, Mexican scholar from 50 years ago or more. He passed away not too long ago. And obviously, all the correlations that are built on him, other ones that are proposed, I read them all. And there were certain issues with those as far as when the year starts, because it's all over the place, what day starts the year, things of that sort. But generally speaking, the way the mechanism of it worked, like we've known it, right? We just didn't know exactly which day might start it and when it might start. But when this good friend of mine came back into town, I realized that there was yet another system being put forth that I guess was being put forth decades before I became aware of it. But when I became aware of that other way of counting, it literally made no sense to me, but it's what prompted me to go back to looking at the calendar. And so essentially...
So it was good for something.
It was definitely good for something because it basically prompted me to go back and look. I'll be vulgar and say, well, that doesn't make any fucking sense. I immediately thought that. And but yes, it 100% prompted me to go back and look at things. And the difference is that aside from one is older, one suddenly has far more resources that we didn't have 20 years ago. And what I mean by that is it's really only in the last 8 to 10 years that we can Google anything. And we can instantly have every or almost every codice in PDF format in front of us.
Yeah, for sure. Because before that, I mean, good luck, right? Getting a decent facsimile or getting a copy of it. Or I remember just research on my own, only being able to find, you know, fragments. Certain pages would be reproduced in art books or whatever. But as far as getting the actual codice itself, you know, you were basically out of luck. But now with the internet, it's like all at your fingertips, literally.
Yeah. And, you know, in truth, we have advantages that some of these scholars, because of that alone, didn't have even 30 years ago, where we literally have it all at our fingertips. And the reason that's important then is because when this friend came back, I realized there was this other nonsensical way of thinking or counting. I just said, I have to start from scratch. But from scratch for me was literally looking at strictly indigenous pictographic sources from before the conquest, from before European arrival, from however you want to term it, pre-Cuauhtémoc, pre-Columbian. The point is, let's just say prior to 1519, right? And so I started there. And, you know, again, friend came back, prompted me to look at a few things, assemble the PDFs and every other codice that you can, and you just start looking for patterns. And you start looking at the math, and then you bring in the archaeoastronomy, and then you bring in the post-conquest sources, and it all just starts to build on it. So to answer your initial question, what prompted me to look at it?
It was a lot of stuff.
I'm brown. I saw Aztec in the encyclopedia back in the day that we only had physical books. I started researching it. I left it alone, and then I came back to it when I thought I probably stumbled upon something. And so, the first person I actually shared my research with was that friend that kind of reignited that curiosity and that spark that I had abandoned, thinking we would never know an answer. Presented the information to him, and it was a holy crap, you're onto this, right? Type of moment. So yeah, that's kind of what got the ball rolling. But yeah, man.
Yeah, well, I had been obsessed for a long time with the calendar system, but I was doing my own research, and then I was filling in the gaps because of this lack of resources, right? I was filling in all the gaps that I didn't really know about with this other count that you're referring to. And I was just thinking like, well, this guy must know what he's talking about. Everybody's using this count, so I'll rely on that. But even then I had questions like, well, that doesn't exactly make sense. But I just kind of went with it, right? I wasn't into rocking the boat back then. And I remember we were on a Facebook group, and people were debating back and forth about the different calendar systems, and you hit me up, or I hit you up. I forget who contacted who first, but you just gave me your phone number, and you were like, well, here, just call me. It's easier to talk about this on the phone. And yeah, it was like, I don't know. I don't want to say it was like a revelation, but being able to have those gaps filled in a way that made sense was what I experienced. And man, that you got to remember, I was calling you all the time because I have a good job, so I could afford codices now, and I could afford all this stuff. And so I'm buying all this material and doing all this research, and I'm like, well, what about this? How does this work? And man, it was really cool. I got to the point where I was even dreaming in codices. So yeah,
I remember that conversation.
Yeah, it was like part of it had embedded itself into my psyche. Yeah. So for people out there who don't know anything about the calendar, like let's say you're talking to somebody who knows nothing about it, hasn't been exposed to any of the counts, right? Yeah. How would you start them out? Like, how would you explain to them, like, well, this is the basic, start from this point, and then go from there?
So let me say, I've sat with one person at a time to explain this, and I've given a, PowerPoint presentation to 100 people to explain this. And where I start, in part, depends on the size of the audience, right? But also who the audience is, obviously. And so it's always a question of, like, I don't want to tell you what your tonali is and how we figured out the tonali. I want you to understand how we know what we know. So I don't want to just say your tonali is this and this is how you calculate it. I want you to understand why it all came into being to begin with.
Yeah.
But that can be problematic if I'm sitting with one person versus a crowd. If I'm sitting with one person and explaining it to it, because I say, dude, just come to the house and I'll explain it. And it's like, ask your questions. Stop me at any point, right? If I'm doing a PowerPoint, then that's a little bit different. But ultimately, like, where do I start? Well, let me backtrack and say, when I am explaining it to people who are unaware that there's different proposed correlations, and I just present the information, they essentially absorb it as well, yeah, duh. Like, that makes all the sense in the world. Why would it be anything other?
Yeah.
And why would there even be any other correlation?
And it really does make sense.
Yeah. But when you encounter other people who are familiar with other ways, I welcome all the questions in the world because I'm still going to present the exact same information. The problem then becomes, how should I say? In the moment, my experience with those people who are aware of other correlations and follow them falls into, I guess, 3 categories. I want to say the outright acceptance and, oh, crap, I was wrong and I fully understand why I was wrong now. This makes a lot of sense and I think you're onto something, but then they go back, talk to some elder. They do all these mental gymnastics to explain away why what I'm saying is different. And then there's those who are literally, hear no evil, see no evil, just covering up their ears and are like, no. Like there's too much of a dissonance and they're just not okay with it, right? But I mean, ultimately it is what it is, right? Like I present information, where do I start? to again go back to your actual question, because I've gone off on tangents, is, well, okay, do we want to approach this from an archaeoastronomy and first addressing when the day starts and how it is that we come to know that the year is 365 days long? Or do we just get right into, okay, we have 20 symbols, we have 13 numbers, this is the way those work, and this is the way they interact with the 365-day Shiwit or year, and why it is that the interaction of those two yield a 52-year cycle, right? And, part of where I start and where I end also just entirely depends on how much time we have. Because in truth, a whole lot could get covered in 2 hours, and the vast majority of that's going to go over their head. Or it's like, you know what, come over for 2 hours at a time for a week. And then all the questions you still have, then we'll address them, right? So it really is all over the place as far as where I can approach it from or how much we really want to explain things. And certain things are going to yield more questions, as they should, such as, what I call the second intercalary adjustment, things of that sort, instead of just the leap year, right? That's the first adjustment. But virtually never get into that. Like literally you and 2-3 other people I've gotten into that. And when I say into that, I mean just the conversation of it, because not that any of it is complicated insane math. It's all the easiest math in the world, but people become overwhelmed because they think they can't understand it when it's all really just the simplest thing. So did I answer your question? I don't even know.
Yeah, man. So when we're talking about the calendar system, so this is a system that, as far as we know, right, is inherited from the Olmecs. And
I'll just pause you there. Obviously we go by the terms that people have given them, and then some people throw out the term epi-Olmec. Right now I'm going to say yes, Olmec, because I don't remember if there was any sign of, Tumasat, right? The coefficient, with what I call the coefficient, the number, just for the ease of explanation, and the symbol. Right now I don't remember how far back the first inscription we believe goes, but certainly we'll just put it at 2000 BCE, right, before current era. So we'll call it an easy 4,000 years ago at a minimum, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's all one mechanism that's inherited. But I'm sorry for cutting you off. Please continue.
No, for sure. And then, while we're on this point, I would like to point out that, in archaeology, we don't really refer to the Olmeca as like the mother civilization anymore. Like a lot of people get hung up on that. We're like, well, the Olmeca they're called the mother civilization. And now we have all this evidence that shows there were multiple civilizations that were flowering around the same time. And it's more of a sister civilization to all of these other groups that were growing. But you had these people at this time develop this calendar system, and it's inherited from them. And you have the Maya using a similar system, and then the Mexika and all these groups throughout Mesoamerica. But the basic concept, right, is 20 days or 20-day signs, then 19 months, 18 months of 20 days, and then the 19th month has 5, and that's called the Nemontemi. And then these days are numbered, what you call the coefficients. And I like the use of that word because it helps me understand it in a really simple way. It's easy to grasp, of 1 through 13, right? So you have 1 Sipactli, 2 Ejecat, 3 Cali, 4 Quetzpali, and 5 Coat. And then you just go 1 to 13, and then it starts over at 1 again as you cycle through those 20 day signs. And what you said that really helped me was you just start at Sesipactli, right? And you just count forward without stopping. And that was like the easiest way to look at it. And I think when you're talking to somebody, for me anyway, when I present to people or I talk to people about the calendar system, I usually just start off with that by telling them we're going to start at Sesipactli and we're just going to count forward and we're going to see what happens.
Yeah.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of the 4 Disagreements? Just visit talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show.
So essentially, what I like to do is that, right? I tell people, look, humor me and pretend I'm not some crazy dude. Humor me, and I give people homework, and of course no one does it, but I say, just humor me. Let's just pretend. First step, how many days in a year? This has nothing to do with the symbols or anything of the sort. It's like, well, I saw the sun come up over that tree or over that peak, some natural marker. But you have to always view it from the same location. You can't view it from one spot one day and from another day, right?
Yeah, it
and I
doesn't
see
work
it,
that way.
I see it come up over that peak, and I count how many days it takes to get back to that same peak. Now, it's going to travel north along the horizon, and then south along the horizon, and then back to its location. 365, bam, okay, 365. Don't get all mad, people who are listening, about it's a quarter day. No. You're just watching it 1 year, 365. Everything else kind of falls into place once you've done this multiple times, and you realize why we have to add a day this year because it didn't get back to its location like it should have. There's always a hair off, right? And again, by the way, the day starts when the sun comes up because that's where we're looking at it. It's horizon astronomy. It's where is it coming up on the horizon, right?
Well, and that's also referenced in the Florentine. They make a very specific reference to how the priests in the temple of Quetzalcoatl marked the birth of the day at sunrise.
Yeah. Ask a farmer. Well, for them, it starts right before sunrise, right? When the day starts. But essentially is that, right? Like, we don't always have to start with the explanation of how do we know it's 365, but that's how we know, right? And then why do we divide by 20? Well, because we have 20 digits, right? So what we say, the Indigenous bigesimal system of Mesoamerica. And so if you divide 365 by 20, you're going to get 18 plus 5. So that's how we have the months, plain and simple. Sempalilwi. Literally, a count of 20. 20 days, multiple translations for Inuit, but that being one of them, right? And so that is the Shiwi, that, just 365 months of 20 days gives you 18 plus 5, so it's 19 months. All right. Now that doesn't have to do with when I tell people, okay, we're going to start this, we're going to explain this, pretend today is day one of the beginning of time. And we're not worried about, when? Well, what do you mean when? Today's day one. Yeah, but is it in January, February, or March? It doesn't exist for us. That's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. That does not exist right now. We are literally pretending it's primordial times. It's just the Scalipoca on his raft in the water calling out Tipacli, right? It's day one of the dawn. And what's the first day? Well, first off, I tell them, label it all. Go ahead, do it with me. It's day one of year one. Day one of year one. Okay, we have these 20 symbols that we have now inherited. Because we're not coming up with our own 20 symbols. Let's just say we have 20 symbols. And the first symbol is Tipacli. Now, I don't know if it's because of the idea. I like to connect it in my mind to, again, that primordial time of the creation of the world, of one of the many stories of, Tezcatlipoca being on the raft, and Tipacli comes up, bites his foot, becomes the land,
bites
right?
off his foot,
simplifying it. But it's that primordial, Zipactonal no Shomoko. Again, Zipactonal, it starts with Tipacli, right? The first couple or whatnot, depending on the story you go by, right? But essentially, if we just say, okay, so I'm going to label Tipacli is the first day, okay? We've inherited the system of coefficients of 1 through 13. We know because we have multiple tonalamats where it's obvious. Okay, the first one is Tipacli. Now, so if people humor me, start with me here and say, I'm going to label day one, year one Tipacli. Okay. Day two, still year one, it's going to be Oaxaca. I tell them, do this from day one through 365. Now, we always tell people time is cyclical and it's nonstop and everything else. Okay, correct. We have 20 symbols. So literally label day one through 365, the 20 symbols nonstop. And you're going to put the coefficient 1 through 13. So when we go to the symbols, Tipacli through Xochitl, the next one's Tipacli. Do that 1 through 365. When we put the coefficient 1 through 13, the next one's 1. Do that all the way through 365. And say, do it. It's a lot of writing. People don't want to do it.
Yeah.
When you get to day one of year two, again, time is cyclical, nonstop, nothing yields, right? Well, day one of year two is going to be, when you've actually written them all out, to Mikisli. And then you do that again for 365, nonstop. The 20 symbols, the 13 numbers, except now you started with Mikisli. So whereas in year one, Mikisli was the 6th day, and the 26th day, and the 46th day, and the 66th day, in year two, Mikisli is the day one, Sipakli now is day 16.
Yeah, because everything shifts by 5. Because if it's 20 days, yeah, if it's 20 days and you've got 5 days on the 19th month,
yeah,
then the next year is going to start. The start day is going to be shift by 5 days.
Exactly. And so for those who are listening, literally write it all out, and you're going to work all the way through year 2, and when you get to year 3, you're going to see 3 Osomale will be the first day of year 3. And you do that whole year. And then the next year will be the first day of year 4. It'll be 4 Poscaquauli. So because there's 365 days and 20 symbols, by the time you start the 5th year, it'll be back to Sipakli, but it's not going to be 1 Sipakli. So you
it'll be 5 Sipakli. Because the coefficient of the first day always matches the coefficient of the year.
Because we, in our theoretical exercise that I asked people to humor me with, if I said year 1 starts with day 1 and it happens to be 1 Sipakli, then that's exactly it. Coefficient of the year matches coefficient of the first day of the year. And you can do this for all the requisite years, and I'm not saying 52 years yet, I'm just saying requisite years, and you will find that the first day of the year, yes, it'll be Sipakli every 4 years, but it won't be 1 Sipakli. Yes, it'll be Mikisli every year, every 4 years, but it won't be the same coefficient.
Yeah.
And so while we started our theoretical, beginning of time with 1 Sipakli, the nature of having 365 days, 20 symbols and 13 numbers that are attached as coefficients to the symbol yields the 52-year calendar. Again, being that the first day of the year won't be 1 Sipakli specifically until we get to the first day of year 53, right? Because we completed 52 years, and therefore the first day of year 53 will once again get back to 1 Sipakli. And so when I went back and looked at all the calendar stuff after my friend came back from grad school, that wasn't my first exercise to try to figure out, what the correct correlation would be. It was actually just, well, we're given dates, because the correlation is not just, hey, how does our calendar work? But this proves or shows the theoretical of how our calendar works, right? But, and I'm going to jump around a little here, but the first thing I did was we're given November 8th, 1519 as being the day that Europeans, Spaniards entered Tenochtitlan. And we're told what the native date is. Not so much date, but the native tonali, and we're told it's Eta Hecat. And then we're given, the fall of Tenochtitlan, when everybody laid down their arms and essentially, stopped the fighting. As in the indigenous system, we're just given the tonali as Secoat, and we're told that was August 13th, 1521. And so what I started with was just counting continuously from those two. Then I did my theoretical exercise, and then I looked at the codices, and only the pictographic, pre-1500s, for all we know, because we don't know when the Borgia group was written. And so when we say the Borgia group, Codex Borgia, the Laud, Gervity Mayer, I forget, I think the Cospi falls under that category. I could be wrong. There's some debate as to whether or not that was done after the European arrival. But I looked at those, and I looked at those looking for, because by and large, they have nothing to do with what we're talking about here, right? They're almanacs for, if you want to use the term divination or whatever, right? I don't get hung up on that. But what I mean by they don't really have to do a whole lot with what we're talking about, it's, you can look through all of them and not find but very select instances of the use of what, some people call the AO sign, or the year symbol, the glyph for the year. And so we have Tonalama after Tonalama after Tonalama that we don't know what they're for. Like, we know one of them in the Borgia is the marriage almanac. Are you a good match with your pareja? When's a good day to get married? Stuff like that, right? But by and large, like, we can guess, and I don't worry too much about that, but I surveyed to see which of these codices show any sign of the glyph for the year symbol. And when you spot that, lo and behold, right, it's always in reference to Zipacli, Miquisli, Osamali, and Coscacuautli. Time and time again, like, you're not going to find really anything other than that. And so when we engage in our humor me, let's do this theoretical beginning of time, literally set time in motion with Zipacli, and we see that the math tells us the year starts with Zipacli, Miquisli, Osamali, Coscacuautli. When the year is 1, it starts, with a 1 for the coefficient for the tonali. We literally see that in the Borgia, in the Laud, in the Fraternity Mayor.
Yeah, and I remember when you were showing me all that, I was like, oh, snap. How did I miss that? Everything matches up. We should also point out that there are 4 year bearers, right? So that's why we keep going back to these 4 days that start off the year. Each of the 4 year bearers is going to start off with one of these 4 days. Mm-hmm. So, you have Akat years. If it's a year Akat, it starts with Zipacli. If it's Tecpat, it starts with Miquisli. If it's a year Kali, it starts with Osomatli. And if it's a year Tochtli, it starts with Coscacuautli.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of this natural pattern that just happens, right?
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
And so people need to understand, it's not that I decided to say when it's Akat, it'll start with Zipac. It's that it is literally shown in the Borgia, in the Fraternity Mayor, at a minimum, that association. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not something I'm like, well, which one do I want to assign to which? It's literally in the Borgia, we see it. We see it in the, I forget what plate number it is, where you have the Tlaloque, and it's literally assigning, like, the first year of the Tlalpili, the 13-year groupings. And it's telling us, when the year is 1 Akat,
27 or 47?
Sounds about right. No, I think you're correct. I have the codices in front of me. I was just being lazy about looking through them. Well, just right. The point being, of course, that again, that's actually assigned in the codices, right? That directionality too, because it's not just this idea of Zipacli, years Akat starts with Zipacli, but rather the directionality of it is also assigned in the Borgia, and it's also assigned in the Fraternity Mayor. And what I mean by that is the fact that years Akat are associated with the East. Like, that's in the codices, right? The fact that years Tecpat are associated with the North, that's in the codices. So Akat, Tecpat, Kali with the West, and the Tochli with the South. So that's not an arbitrary decision. It's not a decision at all on my part, right? It's just looking at the patterns and realizing how they fall. And so, yes, it was plate 27 from the Borgia, for those who want to go and look it up, where you have the 4 Tlalocs, and you very clearly see the year bearer, the symbol, the glyph representing the year with its quetzal feathers, what we call the AO sign, on that plate where it says, 1 Akat, but it's not just 1 Akat, it's the year glyph. So it's year 1 Akat, 1 Zipacli, year 1 Tecpat, 1 Miquisli, and so on. And so that's there. And in the Fraternity Mayor, the main page that people know, what some people call the Maltese cross, right?
Yeah.
We see that directionality, where you see that the top of the page in virtually all Mesoamerican, at least, Mexico systems, maps, what have you, almost always, right, the top of the page, if it's any kind of mappish layout, is east, right? It's not north like we have in what we're used to, right? Mm-hmm. And so that top of the Fraternity Mayor, you see the top off, first off at the top, right, you see the Tocali, you see the pyramid and the sun literally coming up right above it. And then to the left of that, within the circular, I'll say cartouche, right, you have the Akat. And so that's the east. And so right there, we again have Aka is the east. And at the base of that section, we see that every part of it going all the way around is the 260 Tonalpoali, but they point out the first and last day of each month as you look at the directions. And again, it shows, if you're looking at the first day of each month, the first day for years that are associated with the east, Sipakli. The first day for years associated with the north, Mikisli. And you see that, again, Sipakli, Mikisli, Osamali, Koskakwauli pattern. And so that's why we know which starting symbol, Sipakli, to assign to which year, Aka. Because it's literally in, codices from long before I was born.
Yeah, and I gotta say the mayor, I think it's plate 1, right?
I forget how they number it, if it's like supposed to be the first plate or the last plate, but yeah, the titular plate, if you will.
Yeah, the one everybody thinks of when the mayor is mentioned. If you Google the mayor, this is like the image that usually pops up.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, plates of any codex, because there's so much data like laid out in this single image, and it's laid out so symmetrically, and the design elements in it are so perfect and beautiful, and the math works. And when I look at it, I'm like, well, how could how do you even design? Because I was a graphic designer for a long time. I'm like, how did they even design this? There's so much cool stuff going on in here, and it's all testable. It's all verifiable. Mm-hmm. And you could cross-reference this information with all the other codices. And the funny thing that I like, what I like to tell people is, you could test your homework by just following the sun. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to listen to Ochoa. You don't have to buy this calendar and be like, well, why should I trust you guys? It's like, well, test it, verify it. Don't believe me just because I'm saying it. And the easiest way to do it is just to follow the sun. Do it on your own.
Yeah, but I give people the homework and they don't do it.
Yeah.
and mind you, the homework isn't go out there every single day for a year and look at the sun. I just even mean the part of literally write down the symbol day 1 and do that for 52 years. I mean, if you really want to do it, it's 8,980 days, and people, you don't have to. The pattern is established right away. But, once you know what to look for in the codices, you see it, right? And it all clicks, and it clicks because it works. And, I'm of the opinion of 1 time's a coincidence, but 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, well, it's a pattern, and it's a pattern because it is the pattern, right? Because it works, And so what's important, just to backtrack a whole lot to when you mentioned the Olmecs, and, hopefully I don't throw off where you were going to go next, but what we find and what we see then, I do want people to understand that what I am suggesting is not that every Mesoamerican culture had the exact same start date for the calendar and things of that sort, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I do want to explicitly say that is because more and more people are recognizing other indigenous New Year's, right? And these do come from indigenous communities, like, modern, present day, right? But they are fully indigenous communities. But it's important to note that the original and traditional mechanism of we have 365, we have 20 symbols, you count all of these without stopping. That is what yields everything, right? Like that is what yields the 52-year cycle. I mean, that's it, right? And so we know, for example, that at the time of European arrival, when Diego de Landa, priest, went into Yucatan, he literally wrote, essentially, this is how they count. Like, but we see it not just because this priest wrote it, we see it in all their carvings. We see it in the Dresden Codex. Like, the math is all there. The math is proven in all of their carvings. But what it is interesting. So when I realized what I realized, then the question was, oh, wait a minute, this is the mechanism. And these codices are telling me that the year starts, if we're being told 1521, August 13th was the day Secoat, and I know 1521 was the year Trikali, then 1521, but not really, right? The year Trikali starts with Trio Somali. So I'm going to count back from the Julian, because it wasn't Gregorian, Sekoat being August 13th, to see what Julian date was Trio Somali.
Yeah.
And it was March 12th, 1521, which in 1521, March 12th was the day after the equinox.
Mm-hmm.
And the same held true when you try that for November 8th being a day 8 Heka. Well, this is for 1519, so that's the year Oaxaca. The year Oaxaca, the math and the codices tell me, should start with the day 1 Zipacli. Let's count back, once again, the day after the spring equinox. And so that starts to, it's a big aha moment, right? It's like, well, wait a minute. So, I start reading a lot of what the Cronistas wrote. They're all over the place, but a lot of them are like, yeah, dude, like, Otakusoma was so anal about, the sun coming up between the, the two twin temples, or, for Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, atop Templo Mayor, that if it was a little off, he had them, like, knock it down and redo it, right? We have all these markers in Mesoamerica that mark the equinox. Also the solstice, also, winter and summer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean all indigenous peoples necessarily started on one of those 4 dates. I say 4 because there's 2 equinoxes, solstice. Diego de Landa, getting back to him, is writing that the Maya and Mayapan, which is essentially a copy of Chichen Itza, were celebrating their new year on the 16th of July. I'm almost positive that was the date. I might be off. I haven't read it in a while. This is again Julian. Well, the 16th of July is really the 26th of July, which is really the day of the Zenith passage there. So he's basically unknowingly telling us, because he doesn't say Zenith passage, they weren't even aware of what the hell was going on, right? Yeah, they were marking at the Zenith passage. And they weren't marking it with the Zipacli equivalent. But when you look at literally all their carvings, and you look at, every last page of the dress, and what we do know is that it was still independent of when they were starting it, and independent of the symbol they were starting it with. They were, because that's what the math dictates, starting every year with one of 4 symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And it would go, 1, 2, 3, 4. What do I mean 1, 2, 3, 4? First year, Mexika, Sesipacli, followed by Omemikisli, followed by, Ye Amaf Osmali, followed by Nawi, Koskakwali, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like that is the pattern. It doesn't go like the year starts with 1 and then 8 and, something else. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. And the same thing holds true across, the entirety of the Mayan world, right? Regardless of when they're starting. And so even though, modern Maya people are starting their calendar, let's call it in February, we can also look to the books of Chilam Balam. They're starting it in July at the Zenith passage when those books were written. And those are starting different from a lot of the Mayan carvings, but starting with what is, in fact, the Zipacli, Mikisli, Somali, Koskakwali equivalent. So like, Imish, Kimi for Mikisli, so on and so forth. And all of that is verifiable and being done, 400 years ago, even after the, Spaniard arrival, right? So yes, there are modern indigenous communities that might celebrate their year at a different point in time. But if we kind of do like a forensic accounting, if you will, the mechanism has always been the same. The year will always start with one of 4 symbols, and this is the numerical pattern that is established. And so ultimately, that is important because the vast majority of what I will call danzantes, cultural practitioners, so on and so forth, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, what I've found with, especially calendar stuff is, when I'm talking to people, sometimes I see their eyes glaze over because for the most part, and maybe this is changing now, I hope so, people aren't so as much interested in like the getting into the nitty gritty of understanding the sequence and understanding how the calendar system works. or even necessarily like living by the calendar, utilizing the calendar as a living calendar. For the most part, people just want to know, what day was I born on? And, what day should I give, my son or daughter, what day should I give my kid? Yeah. And then they're just happy with that. And I think that's a mistake. I mean, I understand it. Not everybody has the time or is really into it the way that we are, interest-wise. But I think it's a mistake because then it becomes, well, you're just accepting whatever somebody tells you and not understanding why. And for me, I've never been satisfied with that. I've always been the guy that looks at the day and I'm like, okay, but why? Why is it this day? So when we know that, the cronistas were writing this, and it's just the way that it works. When you use the calendar, the day starts, the new year's, the year starts the day after the equinox. And it makes perfect sense because even archaeologically, we have these structures that we call E-groups in Mesoamerica, and they're situated in a way towards the east that if you stand in a certain spot, and you're looking at the horizon, it's marking the rising of the sun throughout the year. And it takes 365 days, like you said, to get back to its original starting point. And it's marked by these temples that were placed there specifically to measure the count of the sun throughout the year. And it's the equinox that happens because it's usually like a temple in the middle and then one off to the left and one to the right, or to the north and the south, because you're looking to the east. And when that sun hits that center temple and it gets back to its starting point, it's the day after the equinox. And that's just how it works. And I think people get hung up over, March this, March that, February this. And it's like, no, forget all of those things. Just go by the equinox. What is the day after we observe the equinox? And I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah. And so on that, getting back to, this is the mechanism and how do we establish correlation? And I mentioned, the two dates that we have in both systems of November 8th, 1519, and then August 13th, 1521. When I counted back, I mentioned, the start of the year happened to be the day after the equinox. And then the question becomes, well, why not the day of the equinox? Right? Well, I'm not saying the day after because I wanted to be the day after. I'm not saying the day of because I wanted to be the day of. I'm just presenting what I saw, right?
Yeah, what happened.
This is what it yielded. And so then philosophically or just from a one ask why that, are people tied off the end of the year, right? So everything they literally talk about bundling the year. And so you're, nice little knot and bow at the end, and that ends it. And so the equinox, well, you can't wait for the marker to celebrate the new year because then it's upon you and you're like, oh, wait, today was the first day of the year.
Yeah, right.
You literally have to observe to confirm that you don't have to add another day for the sun to get to its position. Because then you're like, today's the new year. Oh, wait, the sun didn't come up there.
Yeah, it didn't match exactly where it was supposed to be.
Right. And so you're waiting for the observance of the event to tie it off, I guess, is the point. But whether people want to think of it or not, that way, I mean, ultimately, it's the results that were yielded, right? Like, when I counted back, this is what happened.
Yeah, and I tell people you should think of it because when you talk about the AO symbol, if people Google the AO symbol, it's that solar ray with a band around it, right? So it's like literally a year, that solar ray being bound together, being tied off. And I always tell people, well, you should think of it not in terms of the new year, but that the equinox represents the bundling off of the year that just passed. And then the day after it, you start the new count, right? The next year begins.
Yeah, and so all of it is incredibly simple to me, right? And I think people who understood that other system number one, didn't understand that other system. They didn't even know, like, well, that's what I was told, yada, yada, right? Like, they don't actually understand it. And so then they think when I explain everything that it's complicated. But in truth, they have never been explained everything to realize how that's complicated. This is simple.
Yeah. Well, that other calendar system, the thing about that one is it just completely falls apart when you go from year to year. Because that other system, and I think it's the only proposed count that does this, is they actually stop the Tonalpuali, right?
Yes.
They stop it, and then they force each year to start at Cipactli.
Yes.
Which isn't how it works. If you start at the beginning and count forward without stopping, that's not what happens. And for whatever reason, they force each year to start with Cipactli, and that just throws everything off. It destroys the entire system.
Literally everything. It's just not how it's done. And understand that the difference of that to, at the beginning of this, podcast interview, whatnot, Platica, I mentioned that I had looked at the calendar very early, a long time ago, and then I abandoned the idea that we can even come to a conclusion. I never knew this, start every year with the same day system. But the reason I abandoned the other one, because you asked if this was the only one who does that, or that does that. The answer is yes. This other count that starts every year with the same symbol is the only one that proposed that, and everybody else kind of came after that as a derivative. So there are a few others. Mm-hmm. But the issue I had with when I abandoned it, not having been aware of this one, was that every single cronista, right? Every single European who stepped foot in indigenous cronista as well, once they learn, the Spanish alphabet or whatnot, they literally all wrote, these people had a leap year just like ours.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, every, quote, academic from Caso on, or all but one maybe, literally were like, no, they didn't have a leap year.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so every single cronista that wrote, from the moment, Tenochtitlan fell to the first 100 years after, every single person said, yeah, they had a leap year just like ours. Everything in the Florentine, Diego Duran, right? Isli Diego de Lan, you name it. Like, all of them say, yeah, they basically had a leap year just like ours. It wasn't exactly, but we'll just roll with it, right? They had a leap year just like ours. But every academic said, no, they didn't. And that's just so insane, because basically that means, like, if I say, well, the Muertos months, right? Micairwi falls more or less around, as we approach, the fall, as we approach it, not quite, right? But as we approach it, if we didn't have a leap day in just 80-year span, it would be off by 20. And so then it would be off by 40. So we're basically having, like, the Muertos ceremonies in, eventually in May, and then eventually in April, and then eventually in January, right? And that just makes no sense. And so AztecCalendar.com, again, do not go there, people. Do not go to AztecCalendar.com. I eventually realized, hey, wait a minute. And you can literally just do the math. We're in 2022 Gregorian, and you subtract 1521, and that yields, whatever 400 or 500 years, and you divide that by 4, it's 125 or 126, whatnot. Literally, that calendar has now shifted off at AztecCalendar.com. Do not use it. They literally right now have the year starting, but people don't realize it because they don't play with it. They have the year, ending starting. So, like, let's call it the shift to, we're coming to the year Tentochtli?
Tentochtli's coming up.
Okay. Well, on AztecCalendar.com, do not use it. Tentochtli started back in October. They're over 120 days off because, according to them, we didn't have a leap year. But what that also means is La Cachipoalisi, springtime ceremony, is happening, gosh, I don't know, do the math.
Nowhere
fall,
near
I don't know.
the actual equinox, right? So by eliminating a leap day, by eliminating that correction of a leap year, like, the entire calendar falls out of sync.
Everything. And so while this other system doesn't make the entirety of it all fall out of sync, what it does do is for all those people who want to know their true actual tonality, you have like a, I don't even know, I don't want to call it 1 in 52 year chance, because even then it's not, it's like 1 out of the 52 years is maybe right or maybe off by one singular day. But by and large, it's going to be off. And if that really is important to you, well, both systems are off, right? One that doesn't include, a leap year, one that does, but starts every year with the same symbol, it's still going to be massively off. And no, for those of you listening, one Sipakli is not almost the same as Tueheka just because it's a separation of one. Like that's just not the way it works. And if you're 3-0 Somali and someone else is 5-0 Somali, that's also not almost the same. It's literally, you have 260 possibilities. And everything that comes from that as well, it's just not the same. You're not tocayos, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And earlier you had mentioned how when you counted back using, August 13th, 1521, at that time, they were using the Julian calendar.
Yes.
And when you count backwards and you get to that first day, it matched to like March 12th, I think, was the day after the equinox, the observed equinox.
Yes.
But then it shifts to the Gregorian. Mm-hmm. And so with that, the calendar, the official calendar date used by the Gregorian calendar, the day after the equinox is now the 21st, right? Because it shifts more or less, because it's going to vary by like a day.
So, two things to clarify. When you and I say the observed equinox, I want people to understand, we didn't have atomic clocks or, Greenwich Mean Time and when is one day versus the other because of all these various time zones and so on and so forth, right? And so nowadays you'll look and on the news they'll be like, oh, the spring equinox is at 1 a.m. this year on the 21st. It's like, okay, but we measure at sunrise, right? And so it's like, well, when would that have been observed? Was it then observed on the 20th, the sunrise before? Was it observed on the 21st, that morning sunrise?
Yeah.
And so one of the things I did was just literally look at Stellarium, programs like that, where you could type in geographic location. You could, look at the horizon. Where's the sun rising relative to exactly due east? All these different things, right? I had to learn the difference because we didn't always have this idea of daylight savings time, Pacific, so on and so forth. It's like LMT and all these other time zones that even didn't exist at that time, right? So all of that had to be taken into account to establish the overall pattern, right? And the reality is that it's like, okay, back then, they're just watching the sun rise. And it's like, okay, what criteria are we kind of establishing for what we consider the observable equinox? Well, again, I looked at a whole bunch of charts, literally the computer program. It's like a live program where you could see what stars were, where the sun was, everything else, the moon, you name it, at any point in the past and pretty much any point in the future. Did all the charts and realized, okay, this is kind of the cutoff for when on the news they say the observable, or not, they don't say the observable equinox, but if they say the equinox is at 2 a.m., then that Gregorian days, that is the observable equinox, right? And so they say, well, the observable equinox was at 2 p.m.
Well, not the observable equinox. If the equinox...
The equinox, the hyper-technical, NASA, whatever equinox, not the observable. If they say on the news, the equinox is at 2 p.m., the next day is our observable equinox.
Yeah, because the next day is when you would have actually seen it with your naked eye, mark that point on the horizon.
And while there are nuances to all of that, that's why I didn't just take it as like, that's why I set out to do all these tables that I literally did by hand, because I'm a little bit of a Luddite. don't ask me to use Excel, you know, and saw what the pattern is. And so you can really just realize what the pattern is and continue on with that pattern. Or you could go ahead and have boots on the ground and observe it. I mean, you know, but I did the work, and so I trust the pattern, right?
Yeah.
But there's that. And so when I went back, so I saw that, and I wanted to distinguish here, like, why we say observable equinox.
Yeah.
Not what they say on TV, because we're not watching the equinox at, 3 a.m. or at 10 at night. And then get to what you said, like, right now, when is the equinox? Well, right now, we could say right now today, or we could say, like, for a string of years,
yeah,
it might be, right? And so the day after the equinox this year, where do I have that calendar?
It's March 21st.
Right? So this coming year starts on the 21st?
Yeah.
Okay. Because, the easy thing for me to say is this coming year starts on Tencoscacuautli.
Yeah.
And not have to worry about that whole March 21st, right? The reason it's not always going to be, if we're going Gregorian and saying March 21st, is because of how the Gregorian system adjusts their leap year. And so there's been chunks of time where the equinox, right, as measured by modern society, was the 20th, the 20th, the 20th, the 20th. Or it might be, really the pattern is more like the 20th, 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 21st. 20th, 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 21st.
Yeah.
And then it's 21st, 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 20th. But it can also be 21, 21, 21, 22. And the reason, because I did all the charts, like I said, is because of how the Gregorian calendar is adjusted. And by that, I mean the secondary adjustment. And this is where we're going to lose everybody and confuse everybody. But the Julian calendar added a leap year every 4 days every 4 years without fail. And that's why the calendar shifted. So like a long time ago, before Europeans ever stepped foot here, there was already some papal decree by I forget who that said the 21st of March is always the equinox. And this is under the, had already like hundreds of years of the Julian calendar. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. The equinox is happening March 12th, some years March 11th. Finally, Pope Gregory said, yo, dude, we need to fix this, right?
Yeah.
But that was already like, hey, we're off, right? And so the fix to that in the Gregorian is it wasn't going to be an extra day every 4 years. We were going to skip it, not, some arbitrary count, but rather instead of saying every 4 years is a leap year, they said if a century year is divisible by 400, it'll be a leap year. If it's not, it won't be. Now, what do I mean? In the past, the year 1600 would have had a leap day. The year 1500 would have had a leap day. The year 1400 would have. The year 1300 would have. But now, the year 1600 will, because it's divisible by 400, but not the year 1700, not the year 1800, and not the year 1900. And that's essentially their correction to try to not be off by as much as they used to be.
Yeah.
But they're allowing a huge error to accumulate, or not a huge error, but they're allowing more of the error to accumulate before they fix it. Whereas for the Mesoamerican system, as I proposed, we're fixing it as we go. We're not allowing this, almost day error to accumulate in 100 years. We're literally, eliminating that amount of error by just saying, hey, the year ends at the equinox and the new year starts the day after.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I already forgot your original question. But,
well, I want to point out that I think it's, is it Rafael Tena that is probably the only mainstream academic out there, a big name academic who said that there was a leap year?
So I want to say he's the first I'm aware of, and he first proposed it to my knowledge, and I could be wrong because it's not like I'm, going out trying to get every book written these days. But But I think he actually proposed that back in 1987.
Yeah.
Which is cool. And I don't think he planned it, because it's the year Seacat, right? So kicking off of 52, which is a whole nother issue to address with people some other time, right? But yeah, he's like, well, yeah, there's a leap year.
Yeah.
Like, oh, why wouldn't there be? Essentially for the same reason that anyone else should have gone along with it this whole time. Everyone says it, but it's not just, I'm sure, not every academic. All the original cronistas said it, but it's the only thing that makes sense. Like, why would we not have, right? Why would we have allowed, Quecholi to shift when it takes place, right? Why would we have allowed the month of Panisli to now take place at a different time of the year by not including a leap day before, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense that a people who are so dedicated to astronomy and using it to chart the progression of time and using that calendar in relation to ceremony that's tied to the seasons and agriculture and warfare, like, it doesn't make any sense that they would be, when it came to that, they'd be like, yeah, nah, we don't care. We won't use a leap. We won't, adjust the calendar at all. Mm-hmm. This is it. It's set in stone. We're just going with this.
It has to be anchored. And, I forget which of the various cronistas, it's probably more than one, but they use the term fixed feasts and movable feasts.
Yeah.
And so the fixed feasts are the ones associated with the veintenas, right? Because they're fixed in time. They happen at the same time of the year every year. So, like, you're not going to have Tlacachipawalisli taking place in December. It's fixed to a set time in the year.
Yeah.
And it's all, positional, right? Where we're at relative to the seasons, if you will. And, the position of the sun. Whereas the movable feasts are the ones that are based on the tonali. So, like, every Nawiolin, we celebrate the sun. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to happen every 260 days. Some years it'll be once, some years it'll be twice. But that's why it's called the movable feast. The rest are fixed. They're literally anchored. And so, yeah, of course we have to have a leap day. Of course we can't just let it float in time. And so, yeah, Rafael Tena is the first one that I'm aware did that. A lot of these people I didn't become aware of until I had stumbled upon what I stumbled on. Because again, I had abandoned all of this and then decided to look at it again and approach it strictly with indigenous sources. Then I started looking back. And the issue with Tena, which I believe is the one, like, his correlation is the one that Arqueología Mexicana uses, I believe.
It's either his, yeah, I think it is his, right?
Yeah.
His or Caso's.
No. I don't know when the change happened. I don't know when the change happened, but I believe at least for 5-10 years, Arqueología Mexicana uses Tenas. The issue with his is, again, my theoretical and the codices essentially say, Tipacli, Miquislit, Osmalicosca quality start the year. Whereas he is starting the year with a different set of symbols, Quetzalcoatl and the other 3 that go with that, right? So it would be like, out of the 20 symbols, it would be the 4th, the 9th, the 14th, and the 19th. So like, Masa, Malinali. Yeah, so there you go. Quetzalcoatl, Masa, Malinali, and Kiawi, right? Those are the 4 that he says. Or is it I? Yeah. It's those 4 that start the year. I'm not looking at anything right now, so I'm just kind of going off of memory here. And he's starting it, I forget if it's the middle of February. And I
don't know. I've got one of his calendars here somewhere.
For sure it's February. I want to say the middle of February. I forget exactly why, but it's like, I'm telling you, this is what the theoretical says, right? What I call theoretical, again, of the whole humor me and go along. And guess what? The codices agree, right? And guess what, right? Archaeoastronomy agrees. So I'm not, for the life of me, I don't know where he gets the idea of those 4 symbols. I shouldn't say for the life of me. I have some idea. And part of that is, actually now that I'm remembering a little bit, a lot of academics of the last 50, 60 years propose, because there's something to that in the Mayan world, right? Except, again, we have evidence from the Mayan world that a number of things with the calendar were moved around and manipulated. And I'll touch a little bit more on that in a little bit, but a lot of academics of the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years basically believe that the year bearer was the first day of the year or the last day of the year or the 360th day of the year. They were kind of, it's like one of those three, right? And so the idea there, I don't know, don't hold me to this, if the reason Tena proposes those four symbols, the Quetzalcoatl series, if he proposes those because if the year bearer is the last day of the year, then the next day, which would be the first day of the year, is Quetzalcoatl. And that series of four symbols. That may be why, don't hold me to that. Now, interestingly, in none of those systems is it the case that, like, let's say the year 13 Naka, the last day of the year is 13 Naka. That doesn't happen. If the year is 13 Naka, the first day of the year is 13 Naka. That also doesn't happen in those systems. Yeah. So it's like, even when they say the year bearer is the last day of the year or the first day of the year, well, they're just talking about the symbol and not the coefficient.
Yeah, and that stuff matters.
And none of that fits. Like, literally none of that fits. And so all of that also starts to fall apart, right?
Well, I remember when you showed me those, I can't remember which document it is that has the years written out with the coefficients. Well, the year numbers.
Yeah.
Was it the Rios?
It's the Rios. Yeah.
And it's just, it's there. Like, you can confirm that this is how they recorded the calendar functioning. And then also, you know, the 4 year bearers starting off with these 4 specific days, you know, not only is it something that it just happens naturally when you start counting, but I remember when you showed me, I believe it was you that showed me the Celia Nuttall's book. Notes on...
you know, it's like it's called the Note on the Ancient Calendar, I think, and it's basically a paper that she presented to some meeting of anthropologists or something. I want to say it was like 1904.
No, it was 1894.
1894.
So this was a while ago.
Yeah, and so I became aware of that document after I had already figured everything out because, and somebody could probably do the homework on this and pinpoint, at some point in the last 7 to 10 years, Google Books started scanning a bunch of old documents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only reason I even came across that. So in the last 7 to 10 years, we now have access to old books that, you know, obviously we never, like, good luck finding that somewhere. But yeah.
And she also ties the new year to the equinox, right?
So I don't know where or why or how she made this error. But she does virtually the same thing I did. She's quoting Mexican scholars from like the mid 1850s of saying, yeah, the year starts with Mikisli Osamalikos Kakali, Sipaki Mikisli Osamalikos Kakali. Okay, cool. And then she basically said, well, let's just come back. Right? But I don't know why she gets, you know, just a simple error in writing it down, you know, like an accounting error, right? Like when you have me proof the calendars, one little mistake, and it's like,
throw everything off.
You know, if you don't catch it, everything off. She counted back and got to the day of the equinox. But anyone at home could go and do the homework. Like, it gets you back to the day after the equinox. So I don't know why she made that or how she made that mistake. But yeah, I mean, essentially she was proposing this and building upon other people that apparently were essentially saying this 120 some odd years ago, 170 some odd years ago by these other Mexican scholars, who she was referencing, right? But yeah, like it's one of those where there was no reason why this shouldn't have been figured out a long time ago.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up right now. I don't want this to go on too long. But the book, we just put it out. It's now available for purchase. It's a beautiful full color. You got yours, right? I had some sent to you.
The last batch has not gotten here.
Uh-oh. Well, it's called A Mexican Count of Days, the Mexica calendar for the year 10 Rabbit. Kurly Tlapoyawa and Ruben Ochoa. You could get it through Amazon, but if you're not down with supporting Amazon, you could just pick one up from Ochoa himself. And I know quite a few people have already done that because they're hitting me up online saying that they got their calendar from you. And or you could get it directly from me. You could go to chimali.org and pick up your copy there. And if you do that, you'll get it directly from me, and I'll throw in like a free sticker or something for your trouble. But thank you for taking your time to go over this stuff. It's a lot of information. I know it can be overwhelming for first-time people. I remember my first conversations with you. We would talk for like hours, and then I would just sit there going over all of these codices and cronistas and primary source documents. And I was like, damn, it all lines up. And then it just really blew my mind that, because, so many danzantes are just so tied to this other system. Mm-hmm. And it's like I'll explain things to them and they're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. But even then they're like, but this is the calendar that our grupo uses, so that's just what we're going to go with. And I'm like, well, that's fine. But, if you want to have it right, here's this calendar.
I have too many stories about those kind of situations, and we won't get into them.
Well, thanks for joining me, man. It's been a pleasure.
Anytime. And remember, the truth is like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it's always good for you.
Timoitase. Thank you for listening to Tales from Atlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromatlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.